Amazing God, may the words that you've placed on my heart be exactly what you would have me bring to these your people. There was a time in our family, some years ago, when one of my daughters-in-law would say she was my favorite because she was the mother of our second grandson. I didn't take her too seriously and often responded to her saying with my response that says, I'm the favorite family member that in my heart is the one whom I'm with in the moment. After several exchanges like this, I discovered that there was considerable tension between another daughter-in-law who had interpreted the words as a slight to her. That was saddening for me, but it was not the first time I had said something to one person in order to create a better relationship with them, only to have the marks be interpreted differently by another person, causing stress in that relationship. Sometimes my words can hurt people, whether or not I intended it. So the phrase, loose lips sink ships, is another saying that reminded people at the beginning of the Second World War to watch what they say. The slogan was coined as a part of the U.S. Office of War Information's attempt to limit the possibility of people inadvertently giving useful information to enemy spies. The slogan was actually, loose lips might sink ships. And it was one of several slogans which all came under the campaign's basic message: terrorist talk costs lives. It was used in 1942 in a Maryland paper that in May that went something like this. As Countians, local attendees to a school board meeting, registered in the high school lobby before the opening of the meeting, they were surrounded on all sides by placards bearing such admonitions as loose lips might sink ships, defense on the sea begins on the shore, defense in the field begins in the factory, and other patriotic creeds and slogans. These slogans warned American citizens to avoid spreading information related to shipping on the Atlantic Ocean. The government wanted to protect American interests on the high seas as the Germans were mounting their U-boat campaign, sinking cargo and passenger ships bound for Europe to assist in the war effort there. Another saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, has turned out to be incorrect in my life and should be considered incorrect in our society, where words are often used to both hurt and sometimes to heal relationships between people. Our words may have an unintended negative effect on some who hear them if we do not consider carefully what we're saying. They can make or break relationships, reveal our true feelings, and cause us anxiety if we don't understand the full effect of them on all who might hear it. Jesus is using words in our gospel reading this morning, where Mark describes a conversation between him and his disciples as they walk through the villages of Caesarea Philippi. Now Jesus asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" And they replied, "John the Baptist, and others, Elijah, and still others, maybe one of the prophets." So this is not the important question for Jesus. And he responds with a second question, which is the point he's really trying to get at. "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter uses his words for the entire group, declaring, "You are the Messiah." Peter's response seems conclusive and affirms who he believes Jesus is and what Jesus' earthly mission is about. But Jesus sternly orders them not to tell anyone. Perhaps Jesus doesn't want them to spread the word that he is the Messiah because the people might interpret his message incorrectly. He goes on to explain to the disciples that in order to complete his earthly message, he goes on, he must undergo great suffering and death. This causes an outburst from Peter again, this time rebuking Jesus privately. In responding to Peter, Jesus turns to the disciples and calls him Satan. Strong words. Words that surely must have stung Peter. It's what he said before, as "you are the Messiah," seemed right to him. Now he wondered why Jesus was dampening the moment with all this talk of suffering and death. Jesus wants his words to be clear to Peter and his disciples and the crowds. He knows and understands that suffering and death are in his future, and the future of those who will commit to following him. He's preparing them for the road ahead, and he makes it clear when rebuking Peter that the suffering and death that he faces will be their fate as his followers. He wants to give them no false illusions. Jesus is a teacher. And in James's letter, we get another vision of how our words affect others. James is writing about the responsibility of those who would be teachers in the first century church. Now, teachers held an important ministry in the early church because of their influence over others, especially in their understanding of faith. They had a serious responsibility to teach the truth. In verse 6, James writes that the tongue brings to the world of evil into our lives. The tongue's destructive power is such that it affects the whole life, from the cradle to the grave. He reminds his readers that humans were created in God's image and likeness. And when we use our words to curse another person, we are actually cursing God. James elevates the words and power of words to the ultimate level, implying that it is a life and death issue, a salvation issue. So yesterday, like many of us, I was watching some of the speeches around the 9/11 memorial. As I listened to George W. Bush's speech yesterday at Shanksville, Pennsylvania, I was struck by the power of his words. In part of the speech, he said, "On America's day of trial and grief, I saw millions of people instinctively grab for their neighbor's hand and rally to the cause of one another. That is the America I know." At a time when religious bigotry might have flowed freely, I saw Americans reject prejudice and embrace people of Muslim faith. That is the nation I know. At a time when nativism could have stirred hatred and violence against people perceived as outsiders, I saw Americans reaffirm their welcome to immigrants and refugees. That is the nation I know. At a time when some viewed the rising generation as individualistic and decadent, I saw young people embrace an ethic of service and rise to selfless action. That is the nation I know. With these words, the 43rd President of the United States reminded us of all the things that made our country great in a critical time in our history. The actions and attributes of the American people helped pull the country out of the agony and loss that the 9/11 terrorists wanted to drive us to. Those are the actions and attributes which followers of Jesus Christ can ascribe to today, 20 years and 1 day after that horrific attack. Now in Proverbs, wisdom sets a good example for preachers like John Wesley, with her habit of preaching in the open air. Wisdom cries out in the street. In the square, she raises her voice. At the busiest corner, she cries out. At the entrance to the city gates, she speaks. However, we are not all preachers or public speakers, but we all have words. And when we speak, we need to choose our words carefully if we expect to shine the light of God's love on those who hear them. James makes a convincing argument that the words we use reflect our relationships with and belief in Jesus as the Lord of our lives. He is exposing that lie which says I can compartmentalize my life and give Jesus parts of me, but not all of me. James writes that the tongue is a small thing, and yet this small thing just might provide direction for all of us. Who are we really following? And where are we headed? Do our words reflect the cross that Jesus bore for all who follow him? Do our words reflect our roots in him? The fruit we produce with our words reveals the thoughts that we carry in our hearts. Amen.